Hello, VMware Users Group. My name is Shane Gibson, and I'm a technical expert here at Hitachi Vantara. And I'm going to talk about some really cool things that we're doing here with mixing various types of workloads within your SDDC and in the vCloud Foundation environment, where we can take traditional SAN environments and hyperconverged environments and mix those two together so you don't have to compromise or go all in on one architecture. Indeed, VMware and Hitachi Vantara have been partners for quite some time, for nearly 20 years now. And we have a tight integration into nearly every level of VMware's ecosystem and most of their product. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Unified Compute line, or our UCP line. We have our UCP-AC, which is our hyperconverged nodes. We have our UCP-RS, which is our vCloud Foundation stack, and then we have our UCP-CI, which is converged infrastructure. Now, these may look like three separate products, but they're really just building blocks of one another. So starting with our UCP-AC line, this is our hyperconverged nodes based on VMware vSAN. They're simply rack mount servers with internal hard drives that are generally NVMe or SSD. You can take those same servers and put those into a rack and then layer on VMware vCloud Foundation, and this stack will include switching, and you'll have a choice of either Arista switches or Cisco switches, and a turnkey solution for your SDDC or your vCloud Foundation configuration. And then one more step above that is our UCP-CI. Now, what's really cool about the UCP-CI is that if you have the need for bare metal workloads or something else, like say maybe Oracle RAC, you can intermingle and mix these workloads together. So you could indeed have at the top of that rack a footprint of VMware vCloud Foundation, and then below that you could have your like an Oracle RAC cluster or SQL, bare metal cluster or something like that, all managed under the same management software, which we call our UCP Advisor. Now, that's kind of a departure from maybe some of the other folks that are in the same industry, but we allow you to have the same pool of compute, storage, and networking all within the same fabric and all under the same management tools. When you're building out your private cloud, you want to match some of the capabilities that are in the public cloud. That being unified management, a pool of compute, pool of storage, pool of networking, and also the ability to take advantage of next generation applications like containers, something like Kubernetes or something like that. And VMware's answer to that is indeed vCloud Foundation with SDDC Manager. And if you know vCloud Foundation, it's a suite of tools, VMware tools, that come together, packaged tightly together and integrated. So for your management piece, you have the SDDC Manager and VROPS. For your compute layer, you have vSphere. For your storage layer, you have vSAN and vVols, powered by storage-based policies, or SPVMs. And then for networking, for software-defined networking, you have NSX. And then for your container management, you have VMware's new Tanzu or TKG tool, which tightly integrates into vCenter. We have created configurations like this for customers. So this is a real world customer that we've put together a infrastructure as a service, or really it's an anything as a service. We've integrated this stack of Hitachi hardware with all of the automation tools, powered by our APIs and some of the automation tools we have internally. But this really gives you a turnkey end-to-end solution for your private cloud. And imagine how cool it would be is if you could take your old assets and then integrate those into your new assets, and then also have a flexible pool of compute and storage where you don't have to necessarily be all dependent on, let's say, a hyperconverged platform or a converged platform, but have those all tightly integrated together. Now I want to get into some really cool things that we can do with vCloud Foundation and our UCP-RS platform. We have the ability to put fiber channel cards inside of hyperconverged nodes and also mix in converged nodes into that same stack. Now, the new version of vCloud Foundation has the ability to present SAN storage as its primary storage for your workload domains. And that allows you to have independent scalable storage outside of your hyperconverged environment, or have two tiers of storage. And one of the primary ways that we accomplish that is by integrating your SAN environment into your new vCloud Foundation environment. Now, that storage could be older storage, and it doesn't have to be Hitachi storage. We have the ability to virtualize third-party storage behind our storage arrays. So if you're looking at easy way to migrate to this new vCloud Foundation platform or get into a cloud environment or be able to extend out to the public cloud. This is one of the primary ways to do that and to ease that transition into your new data center. So with the ability to attach to external SAN fiber channel attached storage, we can present different volumes from either vSAN hyperconverged or virtual volumes on a storage array or traditional VMFS. And that's huge because that gives you several different tiers of storage and ability to replicate in different ways and scale independently if you need to. It allows you to have the most flexible pool of storage possible and not being locked into a specific type of architecture. And that opens you up to a lot of really interesting scenarios. So this is a real world scenario that we used with a customer. As you can see here, we have a footprint of hyperconverged servers over here, and then we have our older converged SAN attached nodes over here. So this customer was interested in migrating from their old system to a new vCloud Foundation platform with SDDC Manager, and they also wanted that connection into the public cloud, take advantage of all the suite of tools that VCF gives you. So given the fact that we can include these fiber channel switches and fiber channel cards in our nodes, we can then do a storage vMotion non-disruptively from your old SAN environment to your new hyperconverged environment. Now, you're not just limited to hyperconverged. Now, if you're looking to migrate also in a new enterprise SAN storage array, you can connect that too. You can add in converged nodes and then migrate and do a storage migration into your new storage array and then retire the old storage array. And this can all be done non-disruptively. Now that you have our UCP-RS with vCloud Foundation as kind of the hub to get you to that new cloud environment, there's all kinds of other scenarios. I talked about extending to the public cloud. And we've actually done this demonstration where we've moved a VM from traditional SAN to hyperconverged and then to the public cloud and then back again without ever having to turn the VM off. So a couple of technologies in the background that enables this is one primary one being NSX, because you can have VXLAN and extend your network into the public cloud. Now this could also work for a DR site, but given the fact that we can merge these two architectures together, really helps ease that transition from the old to the new. And it also gives you independent scale on your storage side. Well, now that you have that connection to the public cloud, you can take advantage of all the public cloud has to offer, being data locality as far as the different regions, and we're just using AWS as an example here. And also when you have VMC on cloud, VMware on cloud, you can take advantage of some of the microservices that are offered within AWS. So say you have some older applications you're looking to transition to newer applications and you want to take advantage of some of that AWS infrastructure. UCP-RS with VCF totally enables that. So now that you have that solid foundation and you've integrated all of your old assets and your new assets, you're now ready to create that private cloud experience and extend to the public cloud and present policies across your entire infrastructure. This includes dashboards and automation and even a self-service portal, ultimately getting to something like this. So this is vRealize, and this is a self-service portal where your users can go in and click on a tile and then create a VM. Now there's APIs and policies that are driving most of this in the background. And essentially within 3 to 4 clicks, your end users can provision VMs, or they can provision storage, or perhaps they could even provision bare metal servers. And a lot of this is enabled by our UCP Advisor and our open APIs. So as you saw that stack in the previous slide, we have APIs that tie all the way up to the cloud layer. Here is an example of a user going in and they want to create a Windows Server environment. They click on the tile, they get some t-shirt size VMs that are predefined, and then below that they can select what kind of backup policies and what sort of storage policies that they want. Now those are all driven by APIs and policies that are built into our technology. One of the primary drivers that it's enabling us to tie all these things together is UCP Advisor. UCP Advisor is an infrastructure automation tool that takes over the management of your top of rack switches. That includes IP and fiber channel. It also does storage provisioning on your SAN, and it does firmware updating on your servers and your network switches. So UCP Advisor has a whole suite of APIs that allows that top layer cloud portal to tie in to all those infrastructure pieces. And that's what really completes the picture. And as stated before, we have a whole suite of APIs that tie into nearly every layer of VMware's suite of tools. And we got you covered from day 0 to day 365 and beyond, being able to take your old infrastructure and bring you into that newer cloud environment. Now I'm really excited to show you what this actually looks like inside of SDDC Manager and inside of vCenter. I'm going to hand this off to Dylan Lang, who's a technical expert in our European demo center.
Thanks, Shane. So let's see how we can take your VCF platform to the next level, so to speak, with some added capabilities in lifecycle management, with automation, and in addition, providing independent storage scaling capability without sacrificing all the benefits you get from software defined. So this is my VCF environment, my SDDC Manager dashboard. As you can see, I've got my workload domain for management, vSAN based, and then I've got an additional VI workload domain. Just a small environment, just serving some test purposes here, demonstration purposes. What we've set up here for the VI workload domain, we've got as W02. We've got some capacities here on storage utilization using vVol, and we actually started there. So this was deployed as a vVol as principal storage workload domain, and subsequently we added VMFS as well as some NFS storage. In this case, we don't have any vSAN on W02, the workload domain, and MO1, of course, being vSAN based. So let's have a look at W02. Got our summary view. Here we can manage the updates, and here we've got access to the services. So we'll open up vCenter. Here we can see our two environments, the one for the management with MO1, the cluster over here, vSAN based storage, and then we've got W02 where we initially deployed our workload domain using vVol. Since then, we've added some additional VMFS volumes, normal data stores, to this cluster. At the end of the day, we can now make use of the SPBM framework, and we can create some policies. So we can create some policies up front that will mean that when we provision a workload later, we can provision according to our policies to meet the application requirements for these workloads. So what I've got is a couple of examples here, just really simple examples to illustrate the kind of point, but you probably have something a bit more interesting or based on a specific performance requirement. But just to illustrate the point, I've done a kind of direct match or correlation between vSAN and vVol where it comes to the RAID level for vSAN, using the kind of erasure coding or mirroring for RAID 1 with FTT of 1 and RAID 6 with FTT 2. In this case, you normally require 6 nodes, which I don't have. But I can still create the policy to show how this works, and I probably won't have any compatible storage in this case for FTT of 2, but if you look at the normal mirroring setup, that's not a problem. If you look at the vVol, I've got RAID 1 disk inside my pools somewhere, one of my pools, and I also have RAID 6. So even though it looks like the same volume, this Hitachi vVol, within this, it's a kind of a storage container. Within the storage container, I have multiple pools and multiple tiers. Some of them are based on RAID 6, obviously, some are based on RAID 1. But what happens is when you provision the workload will provision onto the storage tier according to this policy that you select. So it'll provision onto the RAID 6 based pool or the RAID 1. You can also combine these together. So instead of having separate policies, it's possible to combine. For example, if I wanted to, I'm just going to select the correct cluster or vCenter. If I wanted to combine, vVol as well as vSAN in a policy and look for RAID 1, or I could do VMFS volumes as well, and I can select both of these. So you can create a policy which shows volumes which are compliant or compatible for the rule sets that you've defined within both vSAN software-defined storage or external storage as well. If you have the features or the attributes of the storage, it'll show you the compatible volumes. I don't have vSAN on that vCenter, but if I did have it, would probably show me that over there. So that's SPBM. Now SPBM, this framework, as we said, gets used for vVol, for vSAN, as well as standard VMFS volumes with our VASA provider. This gets used to seamlessly provision virtual machines according to their, the requirements for the workload itself, but also can be used for containers and for, the container ecosystem within VMware. For example, for container-based workloads, we can create container volumes in TKG clusters. These are hosted on VMware. And this will natively integrate into the SPBM framework with the Kubernetes vSphere CSI driver, which is called CNS, or Cloud Native Storage. The main goal of CNS is to make vSphere and the vSphere storage, including vSAN, and of course now vVol, for example, platform to run stateful Kubernetes workloads. So CNS is responsible for managing the lifecycle of the volumes, including operations such as create, read, update, and delete. This will leverage the SPBM framework for the functionality of the volume provisioning. And so in other words, the DevOps persona can use the storage policies which have been created by the vSphere administrator in vCenter or vSphere to specify the storage service level agreements for the application volumes within Kubernetes. So this is all made possible with our VASA provider, or at least attaching external storage and integrating it into the SPBM framework is made possible from our VASA provider. That's where we kind of started here. It's, you pre-register the VASA provider inside SCDC Manager, and this gives you the possibility to provision vVol-based workload domains. Speaking about provisioning, when we provision a host, if you have a look at commissioning host, you'll see that this checklist includes quite a few steps here, which you'd normally have to prepare yourself before you can actually run through this wizard. Just point out a few things here. The servers need to be on the HCL or the hardware compatibility list or guide. They need to have the correct version of ESXi installed. For example, in this case, 7.0.1. This is still VCF 4.1. The ESXi, network settings, SSH, DNS, all of this, the IP addressing, all that needs to be pre-configured up front. And if you're attaching external storage, you need to provision that storage up front as well. Or in the case of vVol, make sure that the vVol, the VAS provider, is registered, as we showed you in the previous screen. So we'll see how we can assist with some of these steps, like the ESXi provisioning onto the hosts, ensuring the network key is ready, ensuring that if there's any external storage that needs to be provisioned to the server, we can automate this with our infrastructure automation tool, UCP Advisor. Once you have your host commissioned, then you'd be able to provision your workload domains. And when you provision your workload domains, this is where you have the choice. So you start with either vSAN, NFS, or VMFS on fiber channels, so data stores, or you can go with vVol. So let's jump back to vSphere to see how UCP Advisor looks. It's a plugin in vCenter, so we can open up UCP Advisor seamlessly from vSphere console. And here we have one or more registered systems. Normally it would look a bit like this, but since I have an issue on one of my servers, I can see that indicated in this red circle over here. If I open up the system itself and I get some overview of the environment, I've got compute, I've got one storage array attached, I've got 2 Ethernet switches and 2 fiber channel switches. Let's have a look what's wrong with the server. If I drill down, I've got some kind of different views for how I would like to see these servers listed. I can drill into this server that has the specific problem at hand right now. And I can see there's a voltage status which is showing me a threshold has been exceeded. Let's have a look at the voltages on the components on the server. This will just query the server live to get the latest metrics. And here we can see one of the sensors for the battery has exceeded the threshold. In this case, I think it's a bit low. The battery is slowly fading away. Got other metrics, so we can look at the temperatures of each of the components, what's the fan status, all these kind of important metrics that you normally get from the hardware itself, available from vSphere. Generally on the overview, I can see the OS version, vCenter, data center, cluster, etc. Also the unique identifiers for fiber channel and for networking as well. Got some options here for launching the remote console. We can do the firmware updates and a few other buttons here, managing the lights out management, if you will, of this system. If we have I/O cards attached, we'll be able to pick up that information as well. I'll show you another example of that. And if we have vSAN data stores, we get a breakdown of the vSAN environment and the health state of the contributing storage capacity and caching of disks from those that vSAN. What's also maybe important, all the events from the management port to the management system of the servers, also for the switches and the storage, will be rolled up into UCP Advisor. So you can have that consolidated into, for example, vRealize Log Insight, and that gets pushed natively from UCP Advisor over here. So we can just connect that up to Log Insight, and we can consolidate and analyze and review all the events of the system. So let's go back to this dashboard. We can see we've got the compute, storage, networking, and fiber channel. And at the top here, we've got some buttons that help us facilitate some automation provisioning. For example, I can provision a data store. I can configure a data store, which is the whole life cycle actually of the data store. So if you've got provision data store, delete, attach and detach on a storage from a storage array perspective, or mount and unmount the volume from a ESX perspective, and then we can also expand the data store. So let's do an example here of provisioning a data store. I may already have a VMware example, so I've already provisioned 2. Let's do number 3, and we'll provision a new 100 gig volume or data store onto an environment, one or more of the hosts in a cluster. I select the storage system. I can have up to 4 storage systems attached to one of these UCP environments, and then it'll look at the array or the arrays available. So if you have more than one, you can select from the array, and then from that array, you can select which pool you would like to provision into. As we spoke about earlier with the SPBM, different pools may have different capabilities, so I can choose, based on some certain capability or storage tier, which pool I want to use in this case. Yeah, I've got my clusters. I can select, an individual host, or perhaps all the hosts in the cluster, which would be pretty common practice. And then this will, give me this automation capability now to provision this data store across all the hosts in this cluster. So this will create a job. It's created a job from UCP Advisor. You can track that under the tasks view over here. And in addition, we can also follow the jobs through the vCenter tasks. So since everything is integrated between VMware and UCP Advisor, you can also have a look under the tasks of UCP Advisor. And if we find the correct task over here, I actually think it's this one. We can follow that step by step and see exactly what it's doing. Once it's completed the the storage provisioning, which is just done already, just a few seconds, it'll speak to vCenter and the host and rescan the HBAs, format the volume as a VMFS data store, and then make it available for provisioning. So here's our vMogo 3 new data store that we just created, 100 gigs. If we soon after that run out of capacity, of course we can go back into UCP Advisor, go back to configure data store. We can go to the other workflow for expand the data store, select the storage array, and then select from the new data store that we just created, the 100 gig. Perhaps we want to add another, 200 gigs in this case. Submit that, and a similar kind of process would happen now, where it will create a new job, and within a few seconds our 100 gig volume that we created, I'll go to the right place, is now 300 gigs. Saves a lot of time and reduces human error and all that good stuff with the automation that we are introducing here. So let's step back to UCP Advisor and continue the tour on all the capabilities that we can provide here. So if I go into the system itself, we've seen the data store provisioning. We also have OS provisioning, so we can deploy the operating system, for example, ESX, onto the compute node itself, onto the server. It doesn't only have to be ESX. We support other bare metal operating systems as well. Linux, Windows, Windows 2016, Windows 2019, for example, and a whole myriad of Linux-based operating systems. Most importantly, I guess, is the firmware update. So this is where we have a process here. We can upload a firmware bundle. We have firmware bundles for compute and for networking as well. The networking includes the fiber channel as well as the Ethernet switches. For the compute, we can have a look at the details over here. We support the motherboard, BIOS, BMC firmwares, as well as the I/O card firmware updates as well. So if we have a look at what you can do with UCP Advisor, you can schedule or apply the firmware updates directly out of UCP Advisor. We can deploy firmware updates on an individual server, or if they're in a cluster, all 3 servers, we can select them and it'll do a rolling update 1 server at a time. Another way we can take advantage of this firmware update capability from UCP Advisor is to use the new vSphere Lifecycle Manager. So if we go back to our clusters, we can see I have an option now to update my cluster image using the Lifecycle Manager. How this works is we have this overall image for the environment, for the cluster. We can select the ESXi version that we want to deploy, and then we can add our vendor add-ons, but in addition nowadays we can add our firmware and driver add-on bundles as well. So here we are using a hardware support manager plugin, and this will allow us to integrate with UCP Advisor. There's nothing really to do besides for run UCP Advisor, and once the plugin's registered, you have this capability out the box. Now you can select from those firmware bundles you just saw, and then make that part of the image. So now it will not only do the VMware components, the ESXi version, you can do your add-ons, but now you can do your firmware and your drivers during the same lifecycle operation. So single shot, do your software versions as well as your firmware versions. And this is very interesting for a lot of customers today. So we'll step back to UCP Advisor. Go back to our system over here. We've had a look at the OS provisioning, the firmware updates. Another one to mention is the Sync VLAN feature over here. What we can do is use UCP Advisor to have a look at our virtual distributed switch uplinks and the port groups, understand, for the individual hosts, where are they connected to on the physical switches, and then it'll do a comparison of the VDS, the virtual configuration versus the physical, and give you an opportunity to synchronize. What it'll do then is take the VDS port groups and the uplinks, look at those VLANs that are configured, and it'll let you propagate those down to the physical switches. Again, you don't have to log into the physical switches to make these changes. You can do them all from UCP Advisor itself. I also want to quickly show you some of the views inside the Ethernet storage management. Over here, I've got just 2 top-of-rack switches loaded. Of course, we support multiple switch options here. We've got Arista and Cisco as well, and where we can manage and view the port configuration and the VLANs for these switches. So here for this switch, these are some of the ports. List most of the ports over here. And we can see the configuration of each port, what are the VLANs associated, what's the mode, the trunk or access mode for that port, and if you want to add another VLAN, it's as simple as adding a VLAN over here. So this is like a bare metal operation on the switch. You might do this up front before you commission a new host. You want to prepare the port, for example, for some VLANs, perhaps for vSAN, for vMotion, or for the NSX overlays. You might set the ports in trunk mode and add some VLANs that will be required for that. Part of the prerequisites for getting your host and your workload domains up and running. Lastly, what I wanted to show is the API side of things. So we've shown provisioning storage, managing the networking side of things, doing the firmware updates, deploying operating systems onto the servers themselves. You can do that from the GUI, but you can also use the API. Easy to get into the documentation for the API. It's a link from the menu system. And here we can see, for example, how would you do firmware updates onto, or using UCP Advisor perhaps onto the network or the servers themselves. So you can open up this information portal and understand what's the payload, how do we actually run this. And you can actually execute that from here as well, and kick off these workflows from this portal. But you'd normally, in an automation project, take this into your automation tooling. But this gives you a full understanding. So we do also have a workflow package for UCP Advisor. So we have a VRO workflow package which you can import, and it'll give you a lot of the capabilities, some example templates which get you up and running fairly quickly to do your, for example, volumes across the servers, create data stores across a cluster, things like that as well. Yeah, the other option would be bare metal provisioning. So we have a different drop down for that. If you want to do the operating system provisioning, yeah, we have, the API calls for that. We provision the OS using that a policy that we've specified up front, which will, specify the version of ESX. Again, this could be a process that you include for preparing the environment for VCF or for any other, type of workload. We support ESX and and other native operating systems like we've mentioned. So that's all we have time for today. I hope you found it useful. Just to summarize quickly, we've seen how our VCF platforms, together with Hitachi and UCP Advisor and the Advisor provider, can give you some enhancements to your hybrid cloud solution. Take care of the hardware lifecycle management, give you flexibility of choice with the fiber channel and or vSAN based storage, allows you to scale your storage independently of your compute. You can still use the policy-based provisioning framework for vSAN as well as your fiber channel storage. And now you have your enterprise storage array features and availability guarantees, etc., that you can now have for your VCF-based workloads. You can also manage the networking side, the VLANs, and of course you have the lights out management for the compute nodes as well. I hope you enjoyed the demo and enjoy the rest of the conference as well.